computer. Okay, good. Welcome everybody to this warm, sunny Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles. This is our officially our program today is the Roundhouse, our big read for the Carlos Bulosan Book Club. And to start our discussion, we're going to have presentations from two members who've read the book. We have Jocelyn Giaga Rosenthal and Vicky Perez. So either of you could start. Who wants to share, do a brief introduction of yourself and share with us your take of the book, please? Or should I choose who goes first?
I can go first.
Okay,
Vicky,
great.
you want me to go? You okay? You're on mute. You're on mute, so I can't hear that you're saying it's
Yes,
okay.
it's completely up to you. I'm happy either way.
Okay. All right. So maybe hey, Jaime should toss a coin.
Oh, Jocelyn, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I will preface my comments about the book with a little personal history. Since arriving in the US in 1965, my readings about the history of Native Americans in the US ignited key moments in my personal decolonization. I have come almost full circle, though, overcoming the initial anger, angst, and bitterness about how I was quote unquote brainwashed into adoring and admiring everything European or American while I was growing up in the Philippines, which was colonized by Spain and the US for 4 centuries. This personal decolonization included moments of reckoning with ironies of my childhood experiences. An example was when I was 5 or 6, I asked Santa Claus, whom I had not yet realized was my mom, to bring me a blonde, blue-eyed doll, a picture of which I had clipped from an old US magazine. Santa instead brought me a paper mache doll that had shiny black hair painted on it and kind of looked like me, a sort of Asian version of a larger Russian babushka doll. So it was rigid and, it certainly wasn't like a huggable doll. So that was disappointing but also I guess was a sad commentary on why I was yearning for a doll that didn't look like me at all. So I arrived in 1965 here in the US to the turmoil yet excitement of the 60s civil rights and anti-war movements that helped me proclaim, I am brown and beautiful. So one of the very first assigned college reading was Patterns of Culture, published in 1934 by anthropologist Ruth Benedict, which compared 3 indigenous cultures, the Zuni Pueblos of southwestern US, the Dobu peoples in Melanesia, and the Kwakiutl tribe in northwest Canada. I was captivated with the peace-loving Zuni culture. And then I had to wrestle with my Catholic indoctrination, which would claim that these heathens, quote unquote, would not gain entry to heaven. That's what the Catholic, teaching told me. That Catholics were the Catholicism was the one and only true religion. Parenthetically, Ruth Benedict published 6 years later a Race, Science, and Politics, which refuted racist theory. So now to The Roundhouse, a novel that gripped me to the finish. Among the many themes that stirred or captivated me most were 1, coming of age stories of camaraderie and friendships among Joe, the protagonist of the book, and his friends. Um, sorry about the noise. Can you hear the noise? I'm having some construction. Zach, Cappy, and Angus. Number two, the second theme is how external traumatic events can almost overturn the most stable of relationships, like that of Joe's parents, where his mother was raped. And three, the theme of different sorts of grandmothers. I love the iconoclastic grandma Thunder Ignatia because she defied my own values of proper decorum and model of grandmotherly behavior. I want to read an excerpt. Everybody's read the book. I hope you don't mind my reading the excerpt that, just explains this very beautifully. So before I read the paragraph the paragraphs that I want that are pertinent here, this was after Joe, his three other friends, Zach, Cappy, and Angus, had been swimming and I guess playing in the forest and in the rivers. And so they were very tired at the end of the day and very hungry. So I read here. The shadows were long, the air was cooling off, and we were hungry. The way boys get hungry, irrationally hungry, so that everything we saw looked tasty, and all we could talk of on the way home was food. Where could we get food and eat food, a lot of food and quick? That was our concern. But Zach's mom would be at bingo, and Aunt Star was either flush or broke, never in between. And it was Saturday, so by now she'd have spent what she had and probably not on food. Things were lean that week in Cappy's house, though his dad possibly had stew. But his father's bachelor stews were a crapshoot, though. Once he added commodity prunes to his chili. Another time he left some bread dough overnight and a mouse burrowed into it. His brother got a slice with the head. Cappy got the tail. Nobody could find the middle. Our other prospect was Grandma Thunder. She lived at the retirement home at the retirement home in a one-bedroom apartment with a full kitchen. She liked to cook for us. Her closet was bursting with commodities that others traded to her. And before this chapter, there was a statement that I am interjecting here. There are Indian grandmas who get too much church, and Indian grandmas where the church doesn't take, and who are let loose in their old age to shock the young. Zach had one of those last sort. Grandma Ignatia Thunder. Grandma Ignatia Thunder. She had been to Catholic boarding school, but it just hardened her, she said, the way it hardened the priests. She spoke Indian and talked about men's secrets. When she and Joe's grandfather got together to reminisce about the old days, his dad said they talked so dirty, the air around them turned blue. So go back to the conversation of Joe, the protagonist, the 13-year-old protagonist and his friends. She'll make fry bread and meat, said Zach. She always has canned peaches, said Angus. His voice was reverent. Oh, she has her prize, said Cappy. Just don't anybody bring up balls or say the word twat. Who would say that word around their grandma? Well, it could come out by mistake. Come, don't say come. Don't even mention cats. She'll say pussy. Okay, I said. The list of topics not to mention while we stuff ourselves at grandma's is balls, cats, pussies and dicks. Don't say head ever. Don't say winag or anything that rhymes with the F word or the word cock. Don't say crotch, prick, snatch, like snatch or something. She'll take it wrong, believe me. Don't say horny. Don't say hard. Don't say hot or tit or virgin. Okay. So we went to grandma's house, and sure enough, the meat was already frying and with onion. The smell had a wonderful power, and my stomach, yeah, and my stomach jumped. I wanted to grab anything that I could put in my mouth. There was a stack of jam sandwiches on the table to tide us over. I ate one. Her back was to the stove, and on her table was a bowl of sweet little dried apples. There was an apple tree behind the senior citizens, and Grandma always harvested the apples. She picked every apple out of the tree and pared the apples into thin slices and dried them out in her oven and sprinkled them with sugar and cinnamon. I took some apple slices and put them on my tongue. I looked at Cappy. We ate another jam sandwich each and just stood there watching in mesmerized hunger until she started lifting out the fry breads. Then we each took a plate and stood beside her. She took the hot fry breads out of the bubbling lard with tongs and put the lumpy golden browns on our plates. We said thank you. She salted and peppered the meat. She dumped in a can of tomatoes, a can of beans. We kept standing there, our plates out. She heaped spoons of the crumbled meat mixed on top of the fry breads. On the table, there was a block of commodity cheese. The cheese was frozen, so it was easy to grate on top of the meat. We were so hungry, we sat down right at the table. Zach and Angus were outside through her sliding doors in the courtyard. She made their Indian tacos, now just like ours, called them in, and they sat on the couch and ate. For a long time, nobody said anything. We just ate and ate. Grandma hummed as she cooked at the stove. She was short and skinny, and she always wore a flowery pastel dress. Fresh colored stockings rolled down as if it were a fashion accent to do that, and moccasins that she made herself out of deer hide. She clipped her long, thin white hair up in a beret and wore white shell earrings. Her face was gnarled and sly, and her eyes were sharp little shining black marbles. Her eyes were never soft or affectionate, but always alert and cold. This seemed odd for someone who cooked for boys. But then she had survived many deaths and other losses and had no sentiments left. As we filled up, we ate more slowly. We wanted to finish at exactly the same time and to eat and run. But Grandma Thunder made us seconds, and we started eating all over again, eating even more slowly now, still not talking. When I finished, I thanked her and brought my plate to the sink. I was just about to tell her that I had to get home when Mrs. Bijou came in without knocking. The worst of them all, a hefty, jiggling, loud woman. She took my chair at the table and immediately said, yeah, they ate good, said Grandma Thunder. Top shelf, said Angus. We must go now, Cookham, said Zach. Oh, just go, Grandma waved her hand toward the door, satisfied that we had come to her. Oh, this one there, said Mrs. Bijou, lip pointing at me suddenly, fiercely. He's bony. Our heart sank at the word. Bony, Grandma Thunder's voice cracked. She reared up in her chair. I'll tell you who's got a bone in his pants these days. Holy Jesus, said Mrs. Bijou. I know who you're talking about. Napoleon. That Aki Wenzi goes scratching around at night And it's not me who lets the old man in. He's in good shape though, never drunk, never drunk. Worked hard all his life. Now gets himself laid by a different woman every night. You boys, listen up, said Grandma Ignatia. You want to learn something? Want to learn how to keep your little peckers hard all your life? Go and go. Live clean like old Napoleon. Liquor makes you quicker, and that's no good. Bread and lard keeps you hard. He is 87, and he not only gets it up easy, he can go 5 hours at a stretch. We wanted to sneak away, but were pulled back by that last piece of information. 5 hours, said Angus. For he never tomcatted around and wasted his juice, cried Mrs. Bijou. He was faithful to his wife. That's what she thought, said Grandma Ignatia, taking a hanky from her sleeve. The two started laughing so hard they almost choked, and we nearly made it out the door. In addition, he swears by his secret formula. Our heads turned back, and she laughed. Look at them swivel necks. The two old ladies laughed. Should we give them Napoleon's secret formula? I'll wait for you to continue the book. Anyway, that's not the grandmother I am, but I think she's pretty cool.
So we can't say those words around you, huh?
You can. I mean, I'm reading them. I had to check out with my husband, Fred. Is this too scandalous to read in a book club? And then you're taping it too. So you're recording it.
That's okay.
I enjoyed that section too. I thought it was great. But it's already public. It's in a book, so you just reciting it.
Right.
But with more emotion and expression. So
Did that? Oh, good. Did it?
so do you have closing remarks? Was that your presentation? Are you done?
Well, I'm done actually. It's like, if I was thinking if people joined and didn't get a chance to read the book, I think they'll read the book now for sure. They'd want to know what Napoleon's secret.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I think it was a great. One thing to say, Louise Erdrich has such a wonderful imagination and how she's been able to put it in words. I mean, she clearly has a gift and a talent. So anyway, we could talk about her a little bit more.
And
So-
she's part of the Ojibwa tribe.
Yes.
Also in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yeah. Okay, so Vicky, you wanna
Yeah.
do your
My-
presentation?
Sure. It's just kind of fleeting thoughts, but just some of my impressions. That it was a wonderful story within a story, with the backdrop of life on the edge of the reservation. There was the story of the violence against women, against Joe's mom, trying to preserve her dignity and privacy, dealing with the rage and have to maneuver between tribal and non-tribal law, but also the story behind the attack. Then there's the statutory rape, and I thought it was by the governor. That was what was, I guess, maybe I better not say anything if people haven't read it. By the governor with the teen and the violence that the teen experienced. I'd heard about violence against Native women, but didn't understand the actual legal issues that kept women kind of, hopeless situation with that. And this book got me, and I'm hoping others, to really look into what the experiences are and how important it is to get out that information. All of this is set against the backdrop of the maturation of Joe the 13-year-old who wants normalcy in his life as a 13-year-old, but is pulled into the circumstances around the violence. And it saddened me that he had to take matters into his own hands, which is a trauma he'll endure all of his life, even though he tried to rationalize it with the figures in his own folklore, that sometimes measures have to be severe for survival. I loved also the way the puzzle of the story came together. Every person in the story had some piece to solve who did the attack and why. The twin sister of the perpetrator, the gas station couple, the aunts. What I felt familiar as far as Filipino culture is concerned was the weaving of dreams and folklore to explain events and emotions we're experiencing. How he saw the person he imagined who kept watching him, who he decided was actually the police overseeing him to protect him in those final moments. And I especially enjoyed the interweaving of history of his people with the folklore, the story of the liver eater and the people who become good hunters, and how they would take on the spirit of the animals and begin to hunt humans as well. And he connected it to their history, connecting how starvation, when all the land and food sources are taken away, that anyone can become that figure. But at the end, I was left with 3 questions that made me think there must be a sequel to this. What happened to Cappy after the accident? What will happen to the file incriminating the governor in the statutory rape? And how can a 40-plus woman get into the head of a 13-year-old boy with stories that made me blush? And that's one of the stories, that chapter. But more seriously, it made me wonder or worry about how stories are being preserved. Joe happened to hear them from his uncle who was sleeping, and a few stories from his aunts, but they were all on a very, I wouldn't say hush environment, but it was it was more through that personal interaction and his kind of seeking out those stories. And I don't know if that is done more broadly, that preservation. Even stories about how, I don't know if it was a relative or a family friend who had to share his leather clothes for food when they were starving. In any case, the stories that did come out made me obsessed about how we do preserve the stories across all cultures before they're lost. But overall, I was really engaged in the story once I got into it. It was very comforting hearing it from a 13-year-old's voice, even though he's telling the story as he's older. He does talk about it in a very normal way of how this 13-year-old wants this normalcy in their life, like anyone, and these things are happening around him. But I thought it was a very delightful, engaging story. So
Telling the story in a very innocent way, naive,
Yes.
young person. In response to this is second book of a trilogy. I don't know if you know that.
Yes, but I understand. In fact, I was looking to see, but it didn't seem that they were addressing different issues. It wasn't. They weren't continuations of the same story. They
the
were
same family, the same tribe,
justice,
all of that. Yeah.
right. Different justice stories. So I'm going to read the other 2.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's I think that's a great summary. Does anybody want to add based on their own specific readings? Let me just, I think Louise, the author, I already mentioned, has such a expansive imagination and a skill in how she gets into the description of very minute, a story within a story, and then all of a sudden just back to the broader story. So anyway, I hope I can write that way. It's something I want to shoot for, but again, for me, it provided the texture, the context, the colors of Native peoples. I think before this story, I have this very broad, stereotypical image of Native people. I mean, stuff that I've seen in movies, so all types of things that we're exposed to leaves an imprint of how we understand the people that are being portrayed, whether in the movies. And I think this book, has provided more depth to it. So, and I think that's reading, education, traveling are ways of fighting against stereotypes. It's the way we all learn about everybody else come across. So if we all remain in our own silos, you're never able to get that unless you read. So, and of course, all of us don't have the resources to travel the world, to go and go to maybe the next state or the town 100 miles from here. But we certainly have these books to read. So anybody else want to add? Otherwise, I would like to go ahead and turn over to our special guest, Jose Paez.
I was just taken by how food is so important to all these different cultures, especially in this story, talking about eating fry bread, which is colonialization of traditional fried food. But I never thought I'd hear Jocelyn saying the words that she was, but it brought me back to her gallery where we all ate coconut jam and looked at art and heard wonderful stories there too. So I just wanted to add that.
Oh, you mentioning fried bread, when that was being mentioned, I think it was Grandma, the one that excerpt that Jocelyn was reading. I was confusing that with sweet bread. So does anybody know what fried bread is?
Yes, you can get it at different Indian casinos, but it's basically dough ball. It's like a donut. It's like a fried donut.
Okay.
Which is made with lard.
Or it could be a flat bread. I've had It's flat and fried. It's almost like naan, but it's the Indian Hindu bread. At least that's
not Hindu.
Naan, Naan.
Yeah, naan is like that, but the Indian, American Indian fry bread is what they gave the American Indians flour and said, here, go make something with this. And so they made this wonderfully delicious doughy bread that's very much like naan in a lot of ways.
Okay, great. Well, wheat all over the world was a staple for humanity for centuries. So I don't know what the origin of wheat was. It from the Middle East, or did it? The Americas was the origin of tomatoes and went to the Europe. Potatoes was from South America, the Incas. Wheat, I guess. Anyway, I'm just rambling here. So
no, but there's something really wonderful about the familial eating rituals that are missions like this, that are always very heartwarming and bring me back to my own family traditions.
Yes. Food, I mean, that's how we sustain ourselves, how we survive. And for hunter-gatherers, Native Americans, it takes a lot of effort to gather, hunt. And with all that energy, there's a celebration in feasting in the food or once they have agriculture, even growing wheat. But anyway, without Jose, I know you sent your bio over. I will share with the whole board. I'll figure out something in our website introducing your presentation here. But yes, if you could please, the stage is yours. Do a brief intro about yourself and your story and anything else you want to share with us today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for the invitation to be in this dialogue with you all about these issues and these topics. My name is Jose Paez, Jose Miguel Paez, and my gender pronouns are he, him, his. And I teach at Cal State University Northridge in the Department of Social Work, and I've been teaching there since 2009. And I'm also a social worker. I've been a licensed clinical social worker for some time, but I got my MSW, my Master in Social Work, back in 2001 at USC. And so I've done a lot of work in the community with mental health, working with families and children, and then just a lot of different consulting work and organizing with students and community members around very particular social actions and justice-based events. So it's a great honor to be here with you all and to dialogue. And also just wanted to express my apology again for my late response to connecting with you all. Thank you for being so patient and flexible and giving me this opportunity. So I do have a PowerPoint, but before I share a PowerPoint, I'll just share just a little bit about me and kind of coming into this space. And I spoke with Jaime yesterday about how this bringing this together of Native and Filipino community and population and history is very personal to me because that's where my family emerges from, or part of where my family emerges from. I grew up, I'm a multi-ethnic or multiracial person. My mother's family is Mexican and Italian, and my father's family is Filipino and Siletz Indian. And those are the four that are on my birth certificate. But I know that there are other, racial and ethnic groups, mixed in. But those are the four most strongly identified with my life and was shaped me. My father was born in the Philippines. He was born in Manila and immigrated here when he was a small child. And the story of how my we also became, Siletz Indians, or how we are Siletz Indians, is my great grandmother. She grew up in Siletz, which is located in Oregon, and on that reservation. And she was forced to go to a boarding school called the Chippewa boarding school. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with boarding schools, especially now in Canada. They just, highlighted the atrocities there. But the atrocities have been known for a long time, and it's what Native people globally, Indigenous people globally have been saying this for a long time about what happened to their children. And similarly at Chippewa boarding school, they've done an x-ray of the grounds there and they found bodies and remains. So my great grandmother was, I believe she was forced to go to that school. I have to say I believe because when I knew her, I was just a kid, a younger kid, and she didn't talk about boarding schools with me, and I don't think she talked about it much with my dad or really anybody. But the point of a boarding school for Native people, again, globally, really was to eliminate the Native part. Explicitly, they said, you are trying to kill the Indian to save the man. That was their stated mission. And so I have to imagine it was very traumatic and not a very difficult, painful process for my great grandmother. She was probably not allowed to speak any language. She was forced to be Catholic. But my great grandfather was in the Philippines. He came here to the US to study in the 1900s. And I haven't been able to verify this, but I do believe he was part of the Pensionado program that brought mostly Filipino men here to study, get their degrees so they could return back to the Philippines. And that's what he did. And he met my great grandmother in Oregon at Corvallis, at the Oregon State University. And that's where they met. And then they traveled around the US a little bit as he got his finished up his doctorate. And then they moved back to the Philippines. And that's where my grandmother was born, my grandfather, everybody was born in those places. So, and like I said, they immigrated here. But I think for my great grandmother, her experience here in the US as a Native woman, and then going to the Philippines and living there during World War II and having the military occupation of the Japanese, taking over their home and bombing of Manila and just conflict and war. And then eventually leaving the Philippines and coming back to the US. She led an incredible life and incredible journey. And she was very devout Catholic, and she was one of the just very sweet, caring person who had a good sense of humor. And all of that, despite all of those things that she had lived through. And as I was reading, and I'll be honest, I didn't finish the book. I did read the Spark Notes, so I do know what happened at the end. But one of the things that stood out to me in this book, and Jocelyn, you read that passage, which also made me crack up when I heard that passage. I thought that was so funny, and it made me think of how humor and joking and teasing and that style was part of my growing up in my Filipino family, in my Native family, in my Mexican, Italian. Everybody had that sense of humor. There was teasing, there was self-deprecating, it was borderline dirty, just suggestive. I mean, it was just, we were exposed to a lot of that. And I think a big part of that humor and laughing is to deal with the horrific violence that so many of my previous generations experienced. And so that's a little bit about me and why I'm here. And so if it's okay, I'll share a little bit of PowerPoint. Hopefully this isn't too academic sounding. I'm sorry, I'm a teacher, so I tend to be look at a lot of like text and everything, but I'll share this, and I'll try to do this kind of quickly and move through it. And hopefully this will help connect to some of the themes that you all brought up with the particular book. Hopefully you can all see this.
Yes. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, great. So just to give a sense, and I show this as an image to give you a sense of like how many Native people, indigenous people were here. And this is maybe people just in California. And this is at least 12,000 years of these people existing here and living here and trading and surviving, and probably more than that, probably more than 12,000 years. Since time immemorial. And I think this is so important to say and point out, because the efforts of colonization, and there's different types of colonization, but the specific type here in the US, one specific type is the settler or colonial view. And the whole point of that is one of the whole points of that is to eliminate indigenous people in all sorts of ways. So the fact that we would go, if you did any of your education, or you have children have had any education in California, that they might not ever know any of this knowledge, or have only the stereotypes, like Jaime, like you're mentioning, just kind of those stereotype, views of Native people. That is all by intention. That is all by design. That is the hope of a settler colonial nation, which is the hope is that indigenous people will disappear and be erased. And I think that's a key theme that I found through the parts of the Roundhouse that I was reading through. So just again to highlight this, and this is also part of acknowledging where we are. I live in Van Nuys, and that's the traditional territories of the Sesa-Vitam, and these lands are known as the Sesavanga. And I've learned that through my conversations and my work with the Tatavian people. They are the descendants of the Sesa-Vitam. And then in the Los Angeles area is the Gabrielino tribe, or also known as Tongva, or Tongve, or also known as Kish. I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, so I apologize if I'm not using saying the language correctly. And then, to the west, and on the coast is the Chumash people, or, And those are words that really describe lots of different networks of groups of people. But it is important that we recognize that as part of that effort, if you go to the Tatavium website, they have some T-shirts that you can buy, and they have some clothes that you can buy. And part of those T-shirts are providing this counter narrative, saying like, you are on Tatavium Chumash Tongva land, and having to think differently about our relationship to this land and this place. And they say, there's this other T-shirt you can buy too. So this is native land, and it shows you all of the native words and what those words have become now. So for instance, you can see like Pacoima, it used to be, the native language there is Pacoinga. And I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Again, I apologize. I'm not trying to, mess up their language, but you see like the word Tahunga, Topanga. These are words that we say often, even for the word for Simi Valley, that we say often and that we take for granted, that these are native indigenous peoples' traditional territories, and they are still here. And then there's just one other example of this by this artwork by Votan Enriquez, with the LA Dodger sign, and just again pointing to the fact that this is indigenous territory. So as I think for us, even as people who are immigrants or you're born here, it is a question for us to have to really reconcile and really think through what it means to be living on these lands that are contested, that are in contest. And just again, to show you just a little bit more, I want to always like to highlight, of course, there's massive amounts of violence, but indigenous people are still here. I'm wearing a shirt that says Indigenous Peoples Day. And that is definitely, the fact that this even exists and the fact that this day exists is really the work of Native people, throughout again, the United States, but again, throughout the globe. So for some of the themes that I saw here in this book, which I think are very predictable as a result of, and Jocelyn, you talked about it, with hundreds of years of colonization, is gender-based violence against indigenous people, historical trauma, family separations and blood quantum, land dispossession and the degradation of the earth, and then humor and jokes. And those are not all of the themes. There's obviously so many themes, and this is such an incredible text. I'm so glad I'm reading it. I've just been on a book on my shelf for a while, and so glad to read it and listen to the comments that you all made. So just kind of briefly, just to kind of give us our history here, all of these areas in green are areas where that have been under control by Europe at one point or another. And that's a dominating effect when you see that. And it's important, again, to recognize this. I think some scholars have mentioned something like 85% of the world, 83% of the world has been colonized by a really small, pretty small region. And this is so profound on everyone in such different places. And yet our education systems, we don't really fully contend with or even know how to talk about this to our youth, to one another, or the ramifications of this. And I think the way, again, Jocelyn, the way you opened up, I think really gets to that point. And so what a lot of scholars have talked about is that, there's a consequence to all of this. And these enduring practices and policies and effects of ongoing colonization has structured our world in a very particular way. And they identify that, they call it like modernity or coloniality, modernity/coloniality. And so what we think is modern is really coloniality. It's really the flip side of 500 years of colonization. And so we have these hierarchies that are very rigid in our world of whiteness, of wealth, of militarism, of heterosexuality. All these kind of things are supremacy. And I think those you see really clearly in the book. And I can speak to some specific examples in the text, but just to keep a little more of this historical piece of historical trauma, in addition, it's about a doctrine of discovery, where the Catholic Church said, you have to go out and capture and vanquish and subdue all of the Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, and you have to put them into perpetual slavery. And it gave the license and the freedom for many of these colonizing countries and to go out and do just that. It was in the name of God. It was their manifest destiny to do these things. And so this is a terrible game. So I can tell you right now, it's not a fun game and it's not a great winner. But just to check our history here, does anyone know who made this comment that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct?
No idea.
This is our California governor, Peter Burnett. And he said this in 1851. And this is from a couple different sources of, that give a history of California Indians. But this, I just want to read this passage because it's so important for us to understand where we're at in California. The California governors called out and authorized no fewer than 24 state militia between 1850 and 1861 that killed at least 1,340 California Indians. This is the state saying we need people to mobilize to go and eliminate indigenous people, California Indians. And not only did they call for those, but they raised money to support those operations. And they also said that you wouldn't be punished for killing Indians. And instead, you'd get rewarded. And so along with those militias and other vigilantes, at least 6,400 California Indians were murdered between 1846 and 1873. And this is to make room for and make space for a settler colonial nation to take over, to take land. So the indigenous people have to be eliminated. They cannot exist. And this is a history, again, that I think causes a lot of pain when we look at the mission system in California, when we think about the land we're on or the language that we use, and we're not really aware of it, how painful this is for indigenous people. And again, these are examples right here in California, but this happened in New Zealand, it happened in Australia, it happened in India, it happened in the Philippines, it happens everywhere there are indigenous people, all throughout Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, everywhere you have indigenous people. And so in the text, as one of the key themes is gender-based violence against indigenous people. And a great text to read, I don't know if you'll read this in the next, but by Sarah Deer, is called The Beginning and End of Rape. And one of the quotes that she says is that rape, and sorry if you can see this, but it says rape is more than a metaphor for colonization. It is integral to colonization. And what Sarah Deer makes the point is that rape was a tool. It was rape and murder were really colonial tools of conquest. And they were really used as ways to protect and maintain hierarchy for men, and also heterosexual people. And they were used to control women and queer communities and take ownership of their bodies. And I think that's a central theme in this book. The book starts with the rape of this woman. And I found that to be a really incredible component, because not only was she raped, but I think as Vicky mentioned, there was her name is Mila, right? Was her name Mila Wolfskin? I think she was the other one who was raped by the governor. And then also the woman who was, there was domestic violence with regards to, I think her name is Sonia, right? And there may be some other cases I'm missing. Oh, then there was other woman who was given up for adoption because she didn't fit the traditional view, right? So all of these women, these stories are really important in Louise Erdrich's book. And there's a lot of shaming of their experience. Their response to how they were, their trauma is really becomes the problem for everybody. But the real problem is not their response to it. The problem is rape. The problem is violence against women. The problem is colonialism and patriarchy and these kind of things. And then there was this issue too in the book that I thought was really important to talk about, the legal jurisdictions. And those have been set up in a way, again, globally, but here in the US, that don't protect the victim. They oftentimes were set up in ways that whoever had the jurisdiction, so if Native people didn't have the jurisdiction to actually, go after, try to hold accountable the perpetrator of violence, there was nothing that could be done. And so, as you mentioned, I forget who mentioned here, but you're talking about murdered, indigenous women or missing indigenous women. And what a horrific thing this is, and yet this continues to go on. And again, I just want to keep saying that I'm talking about a U.S. context, but honestly, this is an indigenous. This is a global context. Indigenous women globally are victims of violence at high rates of violence. So I'm not going to get into all of this here. Just wanted to give just a few more things. Another aspect of historical trauma is, family separations and blood quantum. Specifically, I just want to mention on blood quantum because that's one of the things they talk about there is tribal enrollment. And so blood quantum from a Native perspective is really about fractional identities, is what Rachel Cocker Hopkins talks about. It says, it's a colonial structure. And the point of it is to show racial inferiority, because really to be a part of any other racial group, you don't have to like prove your blood lineage, right? And it's also in an effort to erase indigeneity and indigenous people, and then not have to do anything responsibly, fiscally or financially, to Native communities. So this is a device, and it's very divisive in Native communities about how to define who's a member of your tribe and who's not a member of your tribe. And blood quantum has not been around for most Native people. There was lots of other ways to determine how you are related to your tribe or your community. And then just to close up, I know, Jaime, I'm probably just a little bit out of time here, so I'll
No, you're fine.
Okay. Is the attacks on indigenous people globally, but specifically in the Philippines. And I have to say too, coming to my own, knowledge and developing my own understanding, as I've traveled to the Philippines just once to visit family, friends, and family, and it was really interesting the way that people there even saw or talked about indigenous people, and my own lack of knowledge about indigenous people in the Philippines. Although there's millions of indigenous people there in all sorts of different places who are facing land dispossession, who are facing the degradation of their traditional ancestral lands from not only the government but from outside corporations, including the U.S. Human rights violations and then isolation issues and access to like both health and education services. And so then that breaks out even more disproportionately against women, against queer identified indigenous people with disabilities. And so these themes, I'm not trying to overgeneralize, but just to kind of give a thumbnail sketch of that these things continue to exist again everywhere indigenous people are, and that's why they're constantly fighting and pushing back for their sovereignty, their self-determination. And so just to highlight a few groups that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, Philippine Task Force for Indigenous Peoples' Rights is one organization that's doing work in solidarity with and informed by indigenous people. The other one is the Cordillera People's Alliance, another really powerful organization that is doing a lot of organizing with indigenous people and specifically throughout the and then lastly, and I'm sure you are familiar with this quote from Renato Constantino in The Miseducation of the Filipino. But one of the things that stands out to me in all of his work is, I think, very brilliant. He says, the most effective means of subjugating a people is to capture their minds. And I think, Jocelyn, you mentioned this at the very beginning about sort of the unlearning process from Catholicism and from, I forget exactly how you said it, but it's all the things that you thought were great about being, in the US or like that were shiny. I never forget exactly how you said it, but I think that's the thing, is that when we can capture people's minds and we can capture their imaginations about who you are, then we get to define those experiences for people. And obviously in the Philippines, there was a high priority on teaching, Filipino youth how to speak English. Though someone wrote those words in there, I said we speak English, but that's another component of capturing the minds of people, is that once you get them to write in English, think in English, similarly to what happened to my great grandmother and many indigenous people, is you have to kill the indigenous culture, language, traditions. David mentioned the importance of food. You have to get rid of all those recipes. That's why even sometimes learning recipes is like an act of resistance, because this food wasn't even allowed to be made before. Now you're actually making this food. So I think, Renato Constantino's point, I think, really resonated with me in this book as well, because what I saw Geraldine, do is really to, I think not only was she subjugated physically, but she was having a hard time speaking out about it. And then she breaks that silence and she talks about the violence. She talks about her rape and what that is, and also what happened to Mila as well. And I think that's a decolonial, that's a resistance, that is an incredibly powerful, important point to remember, like the courage that it took her to do that. So I just wrap up. These are some other resources of people, and especially young youth, indigenous people in the Philippines. I'm sure you all are maybe so familiar with some of them. But it's a great article, and all the links are here, and I'll send out the PowerPoint so everybody to see the different types of work and the hope that's out there for these within indigenous Filipino communities. And then lastly, just to give the last word to, of course, Lenny Strobel, who I saw speak, like you said, Jocelyn, at the 2018 conference. And, I since then have read more of her work, realized like the really important impact that she has. And the way that she talks about decolonization really resonates with me. This reclamation of a Filipino cultural self, and the part about recovery. And I think of, this particular text, and how I feel like this text is a very decolonial text, because it is about transforming the consciousness. Like you mentioned, Joe is coming into his own consciousness of what it means to be a Chippewa, and what it means to be indigenous. And so is everybody there in there. And they're learning from, going to ceremony, and the fact that this happens a lot around house, is a place of a site of ceremony. So learning to reclaim and learning how to heal from those traumatic memories, is really, really important and vital for our hope and moving forward. So I'll stop here. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to kind of present some of this information and share, and hopefully, and let me know if you have any questions or critiques, but I'll be glad to talk more if you have questions or thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jose. That was great. I mean, you put in the broad context of where the Roundhouse story is located. So yeah, no, it's we can get caught in the weeds, but we see the forest for the trees. Another metaphor. So anybody want to have questions for Jose, comments?
No, I just do appreciate the whole, I guess, the construct, the presenting the presentation you made, and spanning, 14, 15, tying in historical precedents of what we are seeing today. And it is not just local, it is global. But then also you do present hopeful, your presentation does present the whole idea of resistance, and how to attain to decolonize ourselves, continue to do it. So I really appreciate your presentation, Jose.
So Jose, you're gonna be able to share that PowerPoint with us, or somehow then I can distribute, or did you send it already in the email? I saw an email from you.
I didn't send it yet. I will send it right after this for sure. And yes, you can distribute it. And just to say, thank you, Jocelyn, for your comments. And I guess I just want to back up and just say too, I'm positioning myself here not as an expert on this. That what you see here is me being informed by a lot of incredible scholars and people who are doing this work a lot more effectively than I am, and who are much more well versed. And I feel in some way just really grateful to those people who have really broadened my thinking. And a big part of that, Jocelyn, was being at that conference in 2018. And seeing Dr. Strobel speak, and everybody else, and Dr. David, and it really opened my perspective to this, just more of an indigenous viewpoint on being Filipino. But again, just to say, like, I'm not an expert, but these are some of my lived experiences, and some of the things that I'm learning is sort of like an immersion learning. So if I may have got some things wrong, or I may not have gotten everything correct, but people can always offer critique and offer thoughts, and yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That it's sort of like coming full circle from 2018 when we had that conference. That's great.
Isn't that the
Yeah,
well-being conference
Yeah,
that
that is the
in
the first
2018? It was at the
Filipino
Our
well-being.
Lady of the
Both
Angels.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
Catholic Church Cathedral, right?
Oh,
Lenny Strobel and EJ David,
they presented there, yeah.
right? Yeah. So yeah, that's really so satisfying and thrilling to hear that that was that they resonated and helped along your own scholarly pursuits, Jose.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yes.
So great.
And personal, just in personal.
Personal, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It was very, very powerful to see. And I was there with a few of my students who showed up, and it had a really important impact on them as well. So we were just really thankful for that space.
That's great.
Great. Any comments from anybody? It's please go ahead and talk.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about blood quantum, because this is the first time I've heard this term. And now you've given me a great new word to use, but what's the proper way to use this? In the context of talking about stuff that, like, right wingers are all upset about critical race theory right now, and the QAnon's all upset about blood libel. And is this some way to counteract, those positions?
Not necessarily. I think blood. So blood quantum is, again, from my understanding, is was something created by the U.S. government to figure out who belonged to which tribe, and by doing it that way, their intention was that, well, like, if you intermarry with somebody who's not, a full-blooded Indian, then your blood quantum, you're a fraction. So now instead of being 100%, now you're like 1/4.
Wow.
Now after that, your kids might be 1/3. Or I'm terrible with fractions, so I don't, but eventually it's gonna get so thin and so like minuscule that there is no more Indian blood in you. That's really
then you can't apply for Indian scholarships.
Nothing. Yeah. You're eliminated. And I think that's on the other side of that, though. I would say that, like, it is still something that is definitely used amongst many native tribes to determine citizenship. My tribe used it, and it's complicated, and it means, and I think I can see another component of it. In trying to show lineage and trying to show family connection. But I also know that, again, for many indigenous people,
but it's used as a tool to
all sorts of ways.
People.
Yeah, that's been my experience of it. Yeah, and to diminish you, so that when people ask you, like, "Oh, you're Indian, but how much blood? What's your blood? What's your blood fraction?" I'm like, "Oh, on my tribal card it says this," and they're like, "Well, so you're not really Indian, then," and you're like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's true. I don't do that with being Filipino. I don't do that with being Italian or Mexican or anything else like that. But that's the way that that's one of the things we've used that as a blood quantum. But there's also, like, other variations of this throughout our history. But so I don't. So yeah, I don't think it's really useful as a helpful thing necessarily.
I think one example too of how that's used is in Hawaii. I know of Native Hawaiians, depending on their percentage of Hawaiian blood that they can document, determines their right to property rights of the Hawaiian native lands. So yeah, no. I think the same principle has been applied to the native Hawaiian population, probably has already learned from how it was been applied to native peoples in the mainland. So
Yeah.
great. Anyway, I think a
Question.
question. Who?
I was just wondering, Jose, if you were familiar with any of the local issues that we could support as far as First Nation people.
Going beyond land acknowledgement.
Mhm.
Maybe for the LA greater LA area.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, I think that the first thing that people could do is reach out to the leadership in those tribes. If you're holding an event in those areas or wherever you're at, is to reach out directly to them and let them know who you are and establish relationship. I think that's one of the key things. When I hear land acknowledgements, well, I think that they can be really useful. And they're good in the sense of like bringing consciousness and having to start to think through things. But I also know land acknowledgements sometimes happen and people who don't have any connection to or haven't talked to any Native people at all. And so I every time people ask me about that, I said, talk to them, see what they would like. Because they may have, wholly different ideas of how they are. If you go to the Tataviam website, they have language on there about what land acknowledgements mean to them, protocols and processes. And if you go to their websites, you can see a lot of the issues that they're currently facing and what they're doing. So it might be around dealing with mascots. Mascots are still, used, unfortunately, in a lot of sports, teams. And so they are making efforts towards that. There are efforts to literally get to reclaim land. They have land returned back or repatriated back to them. So both the Tongva, the Chumash, and or all the Tongva, Chumash, the Tataviam are all working towards that, as well as trying to become federally recognized, because some tribes are not federally recognized. And that's a whole other process. So those are a few areas that you all could you could look into. But the other thing is, those are important, but also support their events and their programming. When you go and check out their activities, they have like youth programs, they have events of they invite people to come. They sell, they have clothing, or they sell books, or they sell all those kind of things. I think are also really important to be a part of supporting, those kind of, at least what I've been directed from leaders of the Tataviam, and they've shared with me, it's important. They want people to know. They want people to know where they are, what they're doing. And so, again, because of settler colonialism, the intention is to invisibilize that and make indigenous people disappear. So getting to know them. And then I guess just one other thing, just locally, I would recommend a few books to read, like specific texts on the Tongva, on the California Indians in general, because those books will help us all develop our consciousness. And when we have a different level of consciousness, again, going back to what Jocelyn was saying is, you came here with that, your consciousness starts to shift. It transforms how you start enacting and thinking and working in the world. So that would be the other thing I would really recommend. And I can put a couple links to some texts that might be interesting to read.
Definitely, yeah. Please send those resources with
Yes.
links. Anybody else? This has been great discussion. Hopefully it doesn't end here. I think we will try to figure out how to continue this conversation. Basically, this process of awareness and understanding of Native people's history, custom, issues, current events. I think this is an ongoing thing, but this has been a good introduction to that.
And we got to get you back here again.
Yes.
because you're a really an incredible speaker and teacher. And we really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us, Jose.
David, thank you. That really means a lot. I really appreciate that. You know, that's very meaningful to me, and it's very special to be here with you all, and you know, to learn about what you all are doing, and just to listen to like your analysis of this book. Like I said, I didn't quite finish it, but I feel like a bad student. You know, like I didn't do all my homework, but I did read most of it, and I did definitely understand what was happening in the text. And it's just there was one. I just want to highlight. There was one quote too at the very beginning of the book, where right after you know, Joe was kind of checking in on his mom, and it's like right after she's been raped, and he comes to her, and I think she kind of reacts to him and slaps him, and it really stings him. And then later, next time he sees her, he's kind of like cautious about her. He's bringing her food, but he just wants to bring her the food and move away, you know, not really engage with her. But he said as he's moving up to her, he rubbed his cheek, and he said, it wasn't hurting anymore, but I wanted to I think he said something like, I want to re-invite my injury. And I thought that's such wonderful, oh my gosh, re-inviting the injury. You know, that's such a great quote. I think that's how she wrote it. It doesn't hurt anymore, but we know it's still there. This is where it happened. You know, this is the place of violence. You know, this is where I think re-inviting that injury is important for our healing. You know, and talking about it. In addition to, you know, the enslavement of African people, you know, globally, you know, that's another intersecting component to the way that colonialism works is slavery and enslavement of African people, and turning them into commodities and what have you. And so, and that's what you're seeing now. And I think that's going back to David, what you said when you're hearing more about critical race theory. I think you're seeing a lot of people responding to, you know, re-inviting that injury. Like we're saying, enslavement was horrific, and they're still dealing with the ramifications and the consequences of it. And we want reparation. We want something to repair. And that's a very basic concept. When you harm somebody, that you repair. And we haven't done that. We have not listened, and we have not repaired. And so we need to make those reparations and figure out how they can do it.
Berta, did you
Sorry,
want to
that was
say
kind of a
something?
side note, but yeah.
Oh, no. Is
No,
anybody?
definite important linking, definitely.
Yeah.
I think Mirla, did you have a question?
It's too noisy on the background. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to ask, like, do the books of the indigenous people get to be in the big read a lot of times, or?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah, do the books about the indigenous people, the Native American, is it the first time that they had it in the big read, or?
I don't know. I don't know how long the Big Read program has been going on. I think there is a whole rigorous vetting process by specifically, I think it's the Wichita branch of the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts. They're the ones who started this program. And I think, books on Native American is only one thing. I think they do a variety of books. So if you go to the website, I'll send you the link. But this book that we're reading on, I think is one of 10 that they've identified as the 2021 big reads. And they're on a lot of different topics, including environment, culture, other peoples. So yeah, so there may be other entries that are about the native peoples of the US, but I don't know. I would be speculating. So does that answer your question?
Yes, and I have another question. Like, so it's a big deal when your book gets into that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because
Yes.
the NEA, I think provides, it's almost like Oprah's book club. When Oprah identifies a book that her club is, endorsing, and because of her popularity. So I think it's on the same scale. Maybe not even as popular as Oprah's book club, but the NEA, I think all the libraries across the country are associated with them. So public libraries in different uh, areas kind of follow that. So absolutely, if they identify a book as part of their big read for a particular year, and in fact, that's the thing I was discussing earlier. Is so you can apply for a grant to the NEA to do a program on a book. So they'll review it and they may approve your grant, but for your specific book, but they'll vet it. And if they think that it could be part of their big read for 2022, they will list it. So yeah, so it's a rigorous process, and they're starting for next year already. They're opening it up in the fall, so they do a good 3 months review of current books, and it doesn't have to be recently published. It could be any book that was published previously. So, but that's my understanding. This probably I'm not an expert in what they do, but again, any other questions? I think this has been a great thing, and it's something that hope we will continue, and we'll figure out how to do that. Again, Jose, thank you for joining us. Good to see you, and friends, since you're local, uh, we'll be contacting you. Hopefully, we'll see each other in person, because our meeting are usually held at Echo Park Library on the third Saturday of each month. It's preceded with the board meeting from 12 to 1, and then the CBBC from 1 to 3, a couple of hours. So I don't know if you've seen our website, carlosbulasanbookclub.org. I will send you a link to that for you to review. But if there's any other remarks or
Yeah,
questions,
Jaime, we're more influential than Oprah.
What?
The Carlos Balusan Book Club is more influential than Oprah.
Okay, I hope so. And maybe with you, David.
Just putting it out to the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be. It will be at some point. But thank you everybody for joining. Have a nice afternoon for the rest of the Saturday, and enjoy your summer. I think the August 21 program, we're Jose, for information, we will be using another book for that book club. It's by Benjamin Long, Cultural Adaptations. It's around the same theme of, but this is a specific to Filipinos. Filipinos cultural practices, or unconsciously, gestures, whatever. And he discusses that, and
Yes,
it's
the lip pointing that Jocelyn mentioned, the lip pointing.
Or even but anyway, so we'll give you more information on that. And till next time, we'll see everybody. Have a nice day and enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you all. Thank you all. You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. I'm trying to stop the recording.
And
Vicky, do you know how to stop recording?
Under the meeting, at the top of the top tab, it says meeting, and you go down and it will say stop recording.
What if I just end this and see you guys later? I guess it will stop it.
I guess.
All right.
Yeah. I just want to say I'll email you my the PowerPoint as well.
Okay, great. All right. It was great meeting you, Jose. And
yeah,
I think
thank you all.
Be meeting each other more often. So have a
Look
good
at the
day.
Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
Jaime.
Yeah.
look at the bottom next to share screen. Do you have a stop record button? Next to the share
Polling.
screen.
So share screen and then
And
next
then
is
to the right.
polling. Oh, here's stop. Sorry.